Hi everyone. This is going to be a video walkthrough of the blood slides for Bio 139. These are the majority of the slides that will show up on Lab Exam 1 in Bio 139. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we would see were we to look through a microscope with a stained blood slide in place. Now, blood has several different features, and most of them are extremely small and requires pretty decent magnification. You really won't see too much on scanning power, and even low power can be a little bit difficult. So what we're going to be looking at are either high power images or even in some cases oil immersion. So when we first look through, before we zoom in and focus on anything specific, what we will see is something rather like this. And there's a lot going on in this image. We saw this same slide in Bio 137, but we didn't go into nearly as much detail as we do in Bio 139. So right off, there's kind of three things that we see in this image. We see these kind of pink, or even in some cases white, round, kind of donut looking or Cheerio looking structures. We see a clear background, and then we see some other things that look like either pink or clear or faint blue blobs with very dark purple blobs inside of them. And that's really kind of a good description of the different types of things that make up blood on the microscope slide. So let's take a look at exactly what we're seeing, and then we'll go through some more specifics here in just a moment. The clear background is plasma, blood plasma, the liquid part of blood. Remember, blood is a connective tissue. So connective tissue is mostly non-cellular material. We called it the extracellular matrix in Bio 137 when we were learning about connective tissues. Well, plasma is the extracellular matrix for blood. So that clear background is the liquid part of blood. That is blood plasma. But the actual solid things that we're looking at here, those pink or clear circles, the donuts, the Cheerios, those are our red blood cells, or more appropriately, those are our erythrocytes. So erythro means red, cyte means cell. Erythrocytes are the red blood cells. Those are the cells that carry oxygen in our blood. They're packed full of hemoglobin and not really much else. And they hold on to oxygen. They also carry some carbon dioxide, but really we think of them as transporting oxygen in our blood. We see these other things that have the purple blobs in them, and those are our white blood cells, or our leukocytes. Now, white blood cells, leukocytes, leuko means white, and again, cyte means cell. These are primarily responsible for our defenses, our immune response. And we're going to spend a whole chapter looking at the different types of immune responses that we have, and they will refer back to a lot of these white blood cells, or leukocytes, that we're learning in this chapter. Now, in Bio 137, we left it as that. We left them as leukocytes. But here in Bio 139, we're going to be much more specific. We're going to see that there's several different types of leukocytes. And over the next few slides, we're going to be learning the different types of leukocytes. But before we go on and start looking at those leukocytes, let's take a look at one more thing that we can see here. Scattered around, there's a few different things that almost look like flecks of dust on the slide. Very, very small, just pinpricks of kind of a pink color. Those are called thrombocytes or platelets. These are responsible for causing clotting when we cut ourselves. The reason that we don't just bleed forever is primarily thanks to these thrombocytes, these platelets. But the rest of this slideshow is going to be looking at the different types of leukocytes, our white blood cells. Well, here is a slide just showing erythrocytes. We don't see any white blood cells in this at all. But here is the first of the leukocytes that we're going to learn. This is the most abundant. So most of our leukocytes in circulation, this guy right here, this is called a neutrophil. Neutrophils, when we look at them under a microscope, they have kind of they have things called granules. They are granulocytes. Any of the cells that end in "-phil", when we're looking at our leukocytes, if they end in "-phil", they're going to have granules. They're going to be granulocytes. And the granules in a neutrophil are kind of a pink, or maybe even in some cases a salmon, almost orange color. And every time we look at a neutrophil, the nucleus, this big purple blob, is going to look a little bit different. Another name for neutrophils is a polymorphonuclear leukocyte. And that just means there's a bunch of different shapes that the nucleus can have. It tends to have 3 or 4 lobes of a nucleus, all connected by, it's almost like a little string in between each one. We can see it just a little bit right there. It's not so much right there, but we can see this one has kind of a 3 or 4 lobed nucleus. Another one might have a completely different number of lobes, and depending on the orientation, some of the lobes may even be hidden. So they can look a bunch of different ways. But here is one way that we can see a neutrophil. Well, here are 3 more neutrophils, and we can see they all look vastly different. This guy right here, this guy right here, and this guy right here. Those are neutrophils. And yet another neutrophil, this one seems to have 3 lobes to his nucleus. We can see several of those platelets, those thrombocytes that we were talking about earlier here also. Here's a very zoomed in image of a neutrophil, and we can see kind of those connecting points of the nucleus. So neutrophils can look really, really different, but they all have that multi-lobed nucleus and kind of a very faint pink cytoplasmic granules, sometimes kind of a faint orange or salmon colored. But after neutrophils, the next most abundant is called a lymphocyte. A lymphocyte. So it does not end in "-phil", it ends in "-cyte". So the cells that end in "-cyte, when we're looking at leukocytes, they are agranulocytes. They do not have cytoplasmic granules. So when we see the nucleus, it's still going to have that kind of purple, dark stained color. But the cytoplasm is going to be very, very faint, kind of a blue haze. So here we see the leukocyte. Now leukocytes have a very, very large nucleus. It takes up almost the entire cell. But right here, kind of at the top right, at about the 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock position of this cell, there's just a very, very faint pale blue halo of cytoplasm. So Later on, when we get to basophils, basophils and lymphocytes look very, very similar. The difference is basophils, you do not see this very, very faint halo of pale blue cytoplasm. So I'll talk about that again when we get to basophils. But let's look at a few more lymphocytes. Here's another one. Again, the nucleus takes up almost the entire cell, but there's this very, very faint pale blue halo of cytoplasm there. Here's our neutrophil again, hanging out next to a lymphocyte. Very, very large nucleus, very, very small pale blue halo of cytoplasm. Again, lymphocyte. And very, very zoomed in, not too clear of an image, but that was just because I magnified it so much. Very, very large nucleus, very, very small halo, pale blue cytoplasm. Just a little bit off to one side. Now, the next most abundant after neutrophils and lymphocytes, this is a monocyte. Again, it ends in cyte, so it's an agranulocyte. It does not have any cytoplasmic granules. It also has a very large nucleus, but its nucleus is U-shaped or kidney bean shaped. And then the area that is not occupied by the nucleus, very, very faint pale blue cytoplasm. Large U-shaped or kidney bean shaped nucleus and faint pale blue cytoplasm. That's a monocyte. Here we are zoomed in quite a bit. Large U-shaped or kidney bean shaped nucleus, very, very faint pale blue cytoplasm. Now this is one of my favorite ones to look at under a microscope. This is the next most abundant. So we have N for neutrophils, L for lymphocytes, M for monocytes. Now we're at E for eosinophil. This guy is an eosinophil. Here he looks like he's wearing sunglasses. I always think that they look hilarious. I say they kind of sometimes will look like Spider-Man, or if you're familiar with the comic book Deadpool, they kind of look like that because they've got these very, very bright red cytoplasmic granules and a two-lobed nucleus. Sometimes, since they have multi-lobes, they can kind of resemble neutrophils, but neutrophils are either pale pink or pale orange, salmon colored, and eosinophils are very, very bright red. So this is an eosinophil. Here's another eosinophil and a neutrophil off to this side. But here, this guy, very, very bright red and two lobes to his nucleus. Eosinophil. Here's another eosinophil, two-lobe nucleus, bright red cytoplasmic granules. Eosinophil, two-lobe nucleus, bright red cytoplasmic granules. And there's our Spider-Man or Deadpool. Looks like his two eyes, dark purple. Those are the two lobes of his nucleus. And bright red cytoplasmic granules. Eosinophil. And the least abundant of our leukocytes. Here we have a basophil. Basophil, remember, they can kind of resemble lymphocytes. Remember, lymphocytes had a very large nucleus, but you could see a little bit of kind of a pale blue cytoplasm. Well, here, there is a nucleus in there that can be branched or even kind of U-shaped, almost like a monocyte, but we can hardly make it out because it has very, very dark purple cytoplasmic granules that hide everything. So it looks like the entire thing is a nucleus. That's not really what we're seeing. Really what we're seeing are very, very darkly stained cytoplasmic granules. That is a basophil. So before we look at some more basophils, now that we've seen all of the different all the different leukocytes, go back through them in order. We had N for neutrophils, L for lymphocytes, M for monocytes, E for eosinophils, and B for basophils. If you take those initials and put them in order from most abundant, neutrophils, to least abundant, basophils, you can come up with the saying, never let monkeys eat bananas, and that tells you the order from most abundant to least abundant. So again, here is a basophil. It looks like a really big nucleus, but it's not. It's just a bunch of very, very darkly stained cytoplasmic granules. Down here we see a neutrophil. They like to pop in everywhere because they're so abundant. And a basophil. Large nucleus looks like, but it's not. Just very, very dark staining cytoplasmic granules. And here, in this image, you can actually make out some individual granules, but they take up the entire cell. There is no halo of pale blue cytoplasm like we would see in a lymphocyte. All right, so those are the different blood cells that you need to know for lab exam 1. Make sure in your lab manual as you study that you also learn what their functions are. All we did here was talk about the abundance and the identification. You do need to know what each of those cells do. So make sure to learn those. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll talk to you in the next video.